Hello everyone, I welcome you all in the fourth part of our 1000 most expected question series for CUET-PG English Literature exam. So those of you are preparing for CUET-PG 2026 English Literature exam, do like, share and subscribe our YouTube channel to get to know all the important questions that have been already asked in different exams. As you all know, we have already discussed Old English period, Middle English period and Renaissance period, and who are the important authors of those period and what are the important works they have wrote in their time period. And in this session we will discuss Caroline period and Restoration period and who are the important authors and works they have wrote in Caroline and Restoration periods. All of them we will discuss in our today's session. So watch this video till the end to get to know all the important questions and answers. So and without further delay, let's begin the session. The first question of today's session is who wrote the work The Book of Common Prayer? We all know in the Caroline period started in the year 1625 with the death of James I and the accession of Charles I in the reign in the throne of England. And at that time lots of archbishops who wrote different works, after and it was Archbishop Laud who wrote the work The Book of Common Prayer in the year 1637. And after this work the civil war started in the year 1642 and ended in 1660. And at that time period the Archbishop Laud wrote this book, The Book of Common Prayer. The second question is what was the autobiography of Charles I? We all know civil war started in the year 1642 and Charles I was captured and beheaded in the year 1649, and at that time Charles I wrote an autobiographical work, and this work is known as Icon Basilic or the Royal Portrait, which is published in the year 1649. The third question is who became the Lord Protectorate after the Civil War? The Civil War ended with the death of Charles I in the year 1649, and after the Civil War, which is the period from 1649 to 1660, is known as Puritan Interregnum, and at that time period it was Oliver Cromwell who was known as Lord Protectorate, and after the death of Charles I, Oliver Cromwell ruled England from 1649 to 1653. The fourth question is who were the metaphysical cavalier poets? We all know in the 17th century there are a lot of metaphysical poets like John Donne, Andrew Marvell, Abraham Cowley, Thomas Carey, Richard Lovelace, John Suckling, and the metaphysical cavalier poets are Robert Herrick and Thomas Carey. Robert Herrick, who is famous for his poem Hesperides, and Thomas Carey, along with Robert Herrick, is known as metaphysical cavalier poets because they are the followers of John Donne as well as Andrew Marvell also. The fifth question is what was the topographical poem written by Edmund Weller? The topographical poem which deals with pastoral theme and pastoral matters, and it was Edmund Weller who wrote a famous topographical poem, and the poem is known as On St. James's Park. On St. James's Park of Edmund Weller's poem is known as topographical poem, and it was Alexander Pope who wrote a topographical poem, The Windsor Forest. The sixth question is who wrote the poem To Lucasta to Althea? To Lucasta and To Althea are two important metaphysical poems, and these poems are written by Richard Lovelace. Richard Lovelace wrote these poems To Lucasta to Althea. The seventh question is who was known as Lady of Christ? The person who was born in the year 1608 and died in the year 1674, one of the most important and renowned poet and essayist of 17th century, who is known as the Lady of Christ, and it was John Milton. John Milton was known as Lady of Christ because he has long hair in his university days. The eighth question is What does il penseroso mean? John Milton wrote two important poems in his early years, and these poems are Il Penseroso and Il Allegro. And the word and Il Allegro means the happy man, and the Il Penseroso mean goddess of melancholy or the melancholy man. The ninth question is, what are the two important masks by John Milton? John Milton who wrote different works in his time period, and his first poem is on Shakespeare, and he also wrote two important masks at that time, and these masks are Arcades and Comus. Arcades and Comus are two important masks that John Milton wrote. The 10th question is, John Milton's Lycidas is dedicated to John Milton in the year 1637 wrote one of the most important elegies in English literature, and this elegy is written to his friend, and it was Edward King, on whom John Milton dedicated his elegy Lycidas. The 11th question is, what was the historical figure with whom Milton met in his lifetime? At that time, John Milton, who lived in 17th century, at that time they were one of the most important historical person also, and it was Galileo. Galileo was the historical person with whom John Milton met in his lifetime. The 12th question is, what did Milton write in defense of freedom of press? When the Licensing Act was started in the year 1643, John Milton wrote one of the most important works of his time period in the year 1644, and the work is Areopagitica. And in this work, he protested against the Licensing Act of 1643. The 13th question is, what was the original title of Paradise Lost? We all know Paradise Lost is John Milton's most important work, which is published in the year 1667, and in this work he condemned the fall of mankind, and the original title of this work is Adam Unparadised. Adam Unparadised is the original title of John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost. The 14th question is, what was the closet drama written by John Milton? John Milton, before his death, wrote one of the most important closet drama, and the closet drama is one. John Milton, who wrote Samson Agonistes in the year 1671 along with his another work Paradise Regained. The 15th question is, who wrote the work Religio Medici? Religio Medici is a work which deals with the religion of a doctor. It was John Dryden who wrote the work Religio Laici, the religion of a layman, and the work Religio Medici is written by Sir Thomas Browne. Sir Thomas Browne written this work Religio Medici. The 16th question is, who is known as Shakespeare of Divine? After the death of Shakespeare, many writers followed the tradition of Shakespeare and wrote different important works, and it was Jeremy Taylor who is known as Shakespeare of Divine. The 17th question is, who wrote the work History of Worthies of England? And after the Civil War period, many authors wrote the important person or historical figures of England, and it was Thomas Fuller who wrote the work Worthies History of Worthies of England. The 18th question is, what is the subtitle of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan? Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, which deals with the political condition of England in the 17th century, and the subtitle of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan is The Matter, Form and Power of Commonwealth, Ecclesiastical and Civil. 19th question is, for God's sake hold your tongue and let me love is a famous line from which work of which poem? We all know from metaphysical poetry lots of questions have already asked in CUET-PG English literature exam, and the first lines of different metaphysical poems are very significant from your exam perspective. And the line "for God's sake hold your tongue" is one of the opening lines of metaphysical poems, and the poem is Canonization. Canonization is a poem by John Donne, and the poem begins with the line "for God's sake hold your tongue and let me love." The 20th question is, who wrote the work An Horatian Ode upon Cromwell's return from Ireland? After the death of Charles I, when Oliver Cromwell came into power, one of the authors who wrote an ode, and it is An Horatian Ode upon Cromwell returns from England to Ireland, and the person is Andrew Marvell. Andrew Marvell wrote a poem or ode in the year 1650 which is known as An Horatian Ode upon Cromwell's return. The 21st question is, Jacobite rebellion happened in the year, as we all know, in the early 18th century, one of the most important Jacobite rebellion, and it happened from 1715 to 1745. The 22nd question is, who wrote the work Hudibras? Hudibras, one of the most important work of 17th century, and it was Samuel Butler who wrote the work Hudibras in the year 1678. The 23rd question is, what was the first play of John Dryden? John Dryden, who born in the year 1631, was one of the most important authors of 17th century along with John Milton, and he wrote many works and essays in his time period, and the first one is The Wild Gallant. The Wild Gallant is the first play that John Dryden wrote in the year 1663, and his most important work or critical work is Essay on Dramatic Poesy, which is written in the year 1668. The 24th question is, what does annus mirabilis mean? Annus mirabilis is a term introduced by John Dryden, and the word annus mirabilis mean wonderful air. The 25th or last question is, when did Absalom and Achitophel publish? Absalom and Achitophel is one of the most important works of John Dryden. John Dryden's Absalom and Achitophel published in the year 1681. In the year 1681, John Dryden published this work Absalom and Achitophel, in which he deals with the theme of biblical King Ovid and his son Duke of Monmouth with the historical king of Charles I and his son. And these are the 25 important questions in our fourth part of 1000 most expected question series. So those of you are preparing for CUET-PG 2026 English Literature exam, do like, share and subscribe our YouTube channel to get to know all the important questions and answers. Thank you everyone for watching this video.